Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. Welcome to each and every one of you. My name is Rabbi Yoni Golker, and on behalf of St. John's Wood Synagogue, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this very important event. We are proud to be hosting this event together with the S&P Sephardi community, JRoots, and the United Synagogue, and we are very grateful that you've joined us this evening to explore and understand and learn more about the Uyghur genocide, and to try and understand in greater depth how their suffering is our suffering. As I've mentioned, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you for taking the time to join us, members of St. John's Wood Synagogue, members of the S&P community, members of South Hampstead Synagogue, and many other synagogues, Jewish people, non-Jewish people, affiliated people, and unaffiliated people. Because this evening, this is really universal, it's a universal event, because it's relevant to each and every one of us, and I'm so glad that you're here to join us. Allow me to introduce you to our panelists. Firstly, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Rahima Mahmut. Rahima is a Uyghur singer, a human rights activist, and an award-winning translator of the poignant prison memoir, Land Drenched by Tears. Her latest work includes working as a consultant and translator for the ITV documentary, which is called Undercover Inside China's Digital Gulag, shown in July 2019. It's an award-winning television show, including a BAFTA TV award. Currently, she's the UK project director of the World Uyghur Congress and advisor Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. Thank you, Rahima, for taking the time to be with us this evening. It's a great honor. I'd also like to welcome Zach Jaffe, who not only is a personal friend, but Zach is a senior educator for JRoots, an incredible organization which specializes in Jewish heritage education. And recently, amongst Zach's other achievements, Zach convened the world's largest online gathering of Holocaust survivors, Holocaust Memorial Day. Zach also guides at Yad Vashem, as well as blogging about the Holocaust education in the 21st century. So Zach, thank you so much for staying up extra late in Israel and being with us this evening. Finally, I'm very delighted to welcome Dr. Alan Mendoza, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, Britain's leading think tank, fighting for the principles and alliances which keep societies free. He directs strategy for the organization, as well as acting as its main public face in mediums as diverse as the BBC, Sky, CNBC, Al Jazeera, Bloomberg, LBC, and Talk Radio, and of course, Yiddish at St. John's Wood Synagogue here and there. On the print side, Alan is a columnist for City AM, London's busiest newspaper, London's business newspaper, forgive me, and has contributed to the Times as well, Telegraph, Daily Mail, The Sun, and a host of international newspapers and magazines. Let me just explain, ladies and gentlemen, the order of proceedings for this evening. In a few moments, I'm going to hand over to Zach, who's going to set the picture of this evening's event as a follow-on event to Holocaust Memorial Day. Once we've heard from Zach, I'm going to be sharing a short few reflections before interviewing Rahima to find out more about her first-hand encounter and story. And then we're going to turn to Alan to try and contextualize the story of Rahima. So without further ado, I hand over to Zach Jaffe.
Thank you, Rabbi Yoni, for the opportunity to be a partner in tonight's event. Tonight's conversation's been titled Their Story in the Context of Ours, and it cannot have escaped any of us that last week we marked International...
Oh, Zach, sorry, you've been muted.
It's all right. Many people would like to do that. As I was saying, it can't have escaped any of us that last week we marked International Holocaust Memorial Day, which was 76 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. And as you mentioned, Rabbi Yoni, that we had the privilege last year of taking 120 survivors in person back to Auschwitz, which sort of seems unbelievable in today's world. And just last week, we convened close to 150 Holocaust survivors together on Zoom. And one of the greatest challenges for us in Holocaust education is to zoom in beyond the vast numbers, beyond the vast statistics, the overwhelming data that we have, into the personal stories and into the individuals, both of those who perished and of those who survived. And in my countless meetings with Holocaust survivors, especially recently, I've personally been struck by the fact that their encounter with call it the depravity of humanity has only served to sharpen their sense of their own humanity. And a repeating theme in these conversations has often been that their suffering should serve as a lesson for the future. And finding the right words to talk about the genocide against the Uyghurs in the context of our history, the Holocaust, can sometimes be challenging. We're well aware that comparisons with the Holocaust often come to be used as a trump card to limit the discussion, or can sometimes be tied to attempts to diminish Nazi crimes in some way. Nevertheless, I feel it's important that we mustn't allow these challenges to freeze us into a sense of inaction and prevent us from learning the lessons which those survivors themselves have entrusted us with. And we know that the language of genocide is extremely divisive, and the discussion can often descend into the depths of the legal realm, which sometimes confuses us and distracts us from the need to engage or the need to become active. I would say that it's important to note that the most often repeated command in the Torah is not to oppress the stranger. And what reasoning does the Torah give? The reasoning the Torah gives is, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Now, the Torah is not limiting our compassion only to those who suffer the exact same fate as us. It's not saying, be compassionate to those people who were enslaved in Egypt. It's saying, be compassionate to the stranger because you know the sense of what it is to be a stranger. It's imploring us to open our eyes, open our ears to the suffering of others, wherever it happens and however it occurs. Now, participants in Holocaust education programs that we run, and I would say that are run across the world, struggle to understand how it is that the world knew so much about the suffering of Europe's Jews, yet failed to act sufficiently or failed to prevent it. I would say our challenge today is how we confront the reality of China's genocide against the Uyghurs, because the ultimate goal of teaching the Holocaust is not simply to impart information. The measure of success for a student of the Holocaust is not recalling dates or names or various key details. Rather, it's meant to touch at the very fundamental moral fabric of society, asking the big questions of humanity and challenging the next generation to find better answers today than our predecessors did in the past. I would say that this evening is an opportunity to engage, for the Jewish community to engage with the suffering of others, with an understanding that due to the burden that we carry with us, our eyes have already been opened, our ears have already been attuned to what suffering looks and sounds like. And we're here to personalize the story behind the headlines. Rahima's story is our route to engage in a deeper and more meaningful way, I would say. And one path to prevention is engagement. And for everyone that's joining us here on the Zoom, watching online, this is, for many of us, or for many people here, a first step. So I want to thank Rahima for sharing your story, for Dr. Mendoza for giving us the essential wide-angled lens in order to understand things more fully, to be able to engage in this properly. And I really hope that this conversation that happens this evening will enable us and empower us to take that torch from the survivors who spoke last week on Holocaust Memorial Day. They stood silent looking back at the destruction, but looking forward, they looked to us, imploring us not to allow the world to darken in the same way. So I hope that tonight's discussion will set us on that path, knowing where we've been, in order to act properly going forward. So really, thank you to everyone for being involved as we start this journey together.
Zach, thank you very, very much for those words of introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, we're all wondering, who are the Uyghurs? Where are they from? This is perhaps a term that you're not familiar with until recent months. Many people I've spoken to told me that before it became on the front pages of the headlines, until a few months ago, they've never even heard of them. Well, tonight's your opportunity to become informed. I want to share with you a very short video clip, about a minute long, to set a little bit of context why we are here this evening before I proceed to interview Rahima. Please look at this.
These people are systematically oppressed by their own government.
We've been waking up to horrific stories every day, heartbreaking images separating mothers from their children.
They live in a police state. where they're monitored by one of the most advanced and intrusive surveillance systems in the world.
Imagine that the police force you to stand in front of a camera for biometric data collection.
Every online activity is tracked.
Imagine that the police force you to install spying app on your phone.
Their religion is restricted. Many traditional Muslim names are even banned for newborns.
Party officials are frequently attacking Islam as very old-fashioned, very backward.
These are some of the suspected detention camps where an estimated 1 million Uyghurs are held. Many of them have not been heard from since being detained.
For those of you who are interested to see that full clip, you can find it on YouTube. The Economist has a clip about the whole situation. It's quite interesting to watch this because it really opens your eyes to understand what's going on. The Uyghurs are recognized as natives of Xinjiang region in northwest China. They're considered to be one of China's officially recognized ethnic minorities. And since late 2016, the Chinese government have subjected 13 million ethnic Uyghur Muslims to mass arbitrary detention, forced political indoctrination, restricted movement, and religious oppression. And there are certain estimates that over 1 million of them are being held in what they call re-education camps. And it's in that context, we're speaking to Rahima, who herself is a Uyghur Muslim. And Rahima, if we could begin, could you tell us briefly a little bit about yourself and your background? If you need to just unmute, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Yoni, and thank you for your wonderful introduction and that short film. I am Uyghur. I was born and brought up in a region called Gholja, one of the most beautiful oases, mountainous and green country in China. Uyghurs are historically the indigenous people in Central Asia, throughout Central Asia. And our language is very, very similar to the Uzbek language. I don't need to learn Uzbek. I can communicate. And culturally, linguistically, we are far more closer to Istanbul than Beijing. So the Han Chinese, and when you compare the Uyghurs and the Chinese people, it is very similar to you compare a Turkish man and a woman to a Han Chinese. So they culturally, linguistically, and our religion, we are Islam, Sunni Islam, and let's say the region itself, as I said, is geographically is in Central Asia, and the northern part where I come from, we are border with Kazakhstan. The nearest city is Almaty.
And tell me, when did you arrive in this country? And tell us a bit about your story, if you may.
Yeah, thank you. So I left my country in 2000 after witnessing 1997, February 5th, I will call it a massacre that happened in my town, in the city of Gholja, where when Uyghur men and women, mostly young, peacefully protested against the Chinese oppression, especially after 3 months crackdown on religion and detaining mainly young Uyghur male. And for that reason, the government opened fire at the protesters, killing many, over hundreds, and followed by mass arrests. It was terrorizing. I was visiting my mother at the time. I lived in a different town called Maitar, where I worked as a petrochemical engineer and then as a teacher. And that was my winter vacation time. I was visiting my family in Gholja, And that event happened. It was absolutely terrifying. Police raided almost every household from that evening, 5th of February, and arrested almost 5,000, mainly young men and women, followed by mass execution. In 1999, the Amnesty reported 195 execution of Uyghurs, branded them as terrorists. And that was the event that finally, actually, I decided to leave my country. At the time, I left my 5-year-old boy, but luckily he joined me in 2002.
So you were separated for 2 years from your child, and at that point you were able to travel freely. Now I understand.
I obtained a student visa to do a master's degree here in Lancashire, and that's how I left. Yeah.
Wow. And presumably you still have a great deal of family back there.
Oh yes, all my siblings. I'm from a very large religious family. 9 siblings. I have 4 elder brothers, 3 elder sisters, and 2 younger brothers, and extended families. I haven't heard from them for the last 4 years now, and I never went back since 2000, since I came. On the day I came, from the day I have been speaking about the atrocities, the oppression, and the.
So could you just explain to us all what happened 4 years ago that you were unable to communicate with them anymore? And presumably now, if any of them would want to join you here in the UK, that would not be an option for them. Just a little bit more of an understanding of that situation, if you may.
Yeah, so as Uyghur people, we are very used to persecution, just like your people. We are since the Chinese occupation, even before 1949, the previous government, the nationalist government, also had many massacres happened in history. And we had the brief independence in 1933, then in 1944, then in 1949, the communist government, the new government, they occupied my country. And then in 1955, they agreed to give the status Uyghur Autonomous Region, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. By the way, we prefer to call it East Turkestan, the former independence name, because Xinjiang means new territory. It doesn't sound Uyghur at all. And Xin means new, Jiang means territory. And therefore, most Uyghurs prefer to call the region as East Turkestan. But using that term in my country, you can face a death sentence. And that is how, but even though the Chinese government agreed or gave us the autonomous status, just like Tibet autonomous region, but they never honored that promise. And the oppression was always it's a common thing, even from my childhood, that I know that I cannot talk freely. If I said something by mistake, it might implicate my family, my parents. Those were the kind of environment. And then especially from the early 90s, since the students' democratic movement in 1989 in Beijing, and then from 1990s, early 90s, the human rights situation started worsened in China after a brief 10 years better record. And as I said, because of the many different massacres, and especially that 97, what happened, as I witnessed, and the atrocities and the helplessness of my people, I didn't want to bring up my child in that country, that one day maybe he will be arrested and imprisoned. Then in 1996, in August, when I learned that the party secretary of Tibet, who ruled Tibet for 5 years, the man called Chen Juanguo, he was appointed a party secretary in my country. And we just know that things can only get worse. It was already getting worse. Every year it was getting worse. And from October, I couldn't get connect to anyone. I called, so from October up until January the 3rd, I cannot get hold of anyone when I'm calling their mobile phones or landlines, including my friends, my families.
Sorry, what year was that? What year was that?
2016.
2016.
So 2 months after this man, I call him, he's a monster. This monster, Chen Juanguo, who started his post as party secretary in my country. And we know that the way how he ruled Tibet, the intense surveillance, the Tibetans they terrorized the Tibetans during the 5 years when he was a party secretary. And then in 2016, so from October, I couldn't get hold of anyone. And then on the 3rd of January, I repeatedly called my eldest brother. I was very, very worried why no one answered my call. It was very strange, and it was terrifying for me. Eventually, when he answered my call, and I said, why no one is answering my phone? And he said they did the right thing and leave us in God's hands. And he put the phone down. That is my last conversation.
That's the last conversation you have with your family. You have no idea how they're doing. And right now, all communication is cut off. So that's just, unthinkable for any of us living here in England in our comfortable lifestyle. That whole concept is unthinkable. Can you tell us a little bit how the information has come out, the recent developments, the headlines that we're seeing, and give us some details on the ground? What's actually going on now, and how do we know it? Have there been eyewitness accounts? You could tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, soon after I spoke to my brother, and the news about the detention, started to emerge. And because I work as an interpreter, translator, apart from my other jobs, and I translated many different reports and also notices and by the Chinese government, by the authorities, and it just showed the intense crackdown started. And from April, we know I learned many of my friends told me that they heard that the people send a message that I am now I might not be able to speak to you because I will be going to school. Or some people say I'm going to hospital. So all this, school and hospital, it's the kind of code, is a detention. Later that year, while translating a lot of reporters' interviews with the people inside the country, some officials and some policemen, some village cadres, for example, and they just revealed that this mass detention is happening. They are cracking down on religious extremists. And then in early 2018, a man called Omar Bakali, he is now living in Holland. He had a Kazakhstan passport. He was detained in 2017, and after 7 or 9 months in detention, he was released because of the Kazakhstan government's intervention. And he revealed, the first interview was reported by Radio Free Asia, and he revealed how he was arrested and the ordeals, the torture. He was chained in the bed for months, and then he revealed the other Uyghurs how they were some died in detention, and revealed how they are forcing Uyghurs to eat pork, denounce our religion, our language, and that he was a very first survivor. And then later we had different survivors, like ex-camp teachers like Sairagul Surabayov, who was a Kazakh. She fled. She was ex-teacher in my city, not city, the same region, Olja. And he said, in this hell-like place, people are not even allowed to speak, or not even allowed to smile or cry. He said, in a black room, where there is no CCTV, that I could hear 24 hours the scream of people being tortured. And she also revealed on this one of the interview on Haaretz, the newspaper, by a Jewish reporter, that how she was forced to watch a gang rape of a girl. And these were the terrifying witness accounts that I have translated throughout from 2017, especially after April. And then from 2019, I started work as a project director for the World Uyghur Congress. Because of the serious situation, we felt that we need someone to work full-time here to lobby the government and also the people. Like you said, not many people even can spell the name of Uyghur, and let alone knowing who we are. And so because of these terrible atrocities, and only I think in the summer of 2018, I remember very clearly, it was my son's birthday, 13th of August 2018, and that was the first time this wide report, a mainstream report about the camps after the UN publicly criticized China, said we acknowledge there are up to 1 million Uyghur and many other Turkic Muslims are detained in the camps. China denied it in the beginning. 2 weeks later, after confronted with these satellite images and many credible reports by the experts, and they said, yes, but that is a vocational training camp. We are training the Uyghurs for them to have a better life.
You know, Rahima, I've done a lot of interviews, but talking to you, I'm getting the shivers down my spine. And I'll tell you why. I've had the privilege of going to Poland 6 times with many groups of school students. And many of them say, you know, as we stand there in the Warsaw Ghetto, in the various cemeteries and death camps, saying, yeah, but Rabbi, this was 60, 70, 80 years ago. This doesn't happen in 2020. And here we are, hearing a story. It's happening today. It's happening today in 2021. It's quite frightening. I want to, before we go to Alan Mendoza, I want to ask you just 1 or 2 more questions. What's the way out of this? What's the way forward? What are the international community doing? Are Western democracies taking an interest? And what can we all do to be helping and supporting you in this life and death situation?
Thank you. This is extremely important question. As I said, you know, from April 2017, when I started learning what is happening, I have contacted many media, try to just reveal and ask them to report this. Until like 2018, August 2018, there are hardly many reports. But at least from that time, 2018, only after the UN that did openly acknowledge this atrocity, this is happening, then we had more countries, especially Western countries, led by the US, started to criticize China. Up until now, the real action that was taken was by the US banning the cotton products, also sanctioning the government officials who are responsible, who are perpetrating these crimes, and so entities that is involved in the camp network, running the camp, building the camp, and torturing people, like Public Security Bureau, for example. But yet in this country, our government still very slow. The words are very, very strong, but the actions are not matching the words, the power of their words. And therefore, I think the most important thing that we can do is how we can approach our own MPs and our own politicians to inform them. I'm sure they are being informed, but I believe we still need more people to contact the MPs and bring this situation into their on the table for them to pressurize our government. First of all, at the moment, we are really hoping the genocide amendment to the trade bill that we are campaigning, we very narrowly lost about 10 days ago. So it will be tabled very soon. Are we hoping this can be passed? The reason I am so want this so much, because we Uyghurs don't have day in court, because the UN route is completely blocked. China has a veto power, and also, they're not a member of the other court, so it's impossible. There is no way we can sue them. So genocide amendment to the trade bill, this is if it passes the Commons, and then if it become active in this country, then people like me, I can ask High Court here to make a determination of what is happening is genocide. Because the politicians at the moment, they say that genocide, we cannot, genocide is supposed to be designated by court, but there is no court available for us. Therefore, that is a very, very important. And also, I would ask for the general public, apart from writing to your MP, following me on Twitter, retweet what I tweet, and raise awareness among your own friends and families and communities. And also is the forced labor, the slave labor, the Uyghur labor, that was already reported. We have credible reports, and so try to boycott goods that is made from forced labor. And
Rahima, with your permission, at this point, I'd like to bring Alan Mendoza into the conversation. As I mentioned, Alan runs the Henry Jackson Society, and Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe your mission statement is the pursuit of a robust foreign policy based on clear universal principles such as global promotion of the rule of law, liberal democracy, civil rights, amongst other things. I mean, how do you respond to Rahima? This is going on in 2021. I mean, this is shocking.
Yes, Johnny, of course it's shocking. And of course, every time I hear Rahima speak, you're reminded of the human cost of this. It's often very easy when you talk about genocide or the term genocide to, kind of contextualize it within large numbers. But actually, every person within those large numbers is a real life human. And Rahima is one such person whose family life has been disrupted and has been under tremendous duress by what's happening in Xinjiang in China. So it is a shock that in 2021, we have this situation going on. I think, one thing I'll pick up on, what she said about the importance of the satellite pictures very early on coming on. Could you imagine, for example, if the world, I don't mean just the military plans, but the world had seen the evidence of genocide in Nazi Germany in the 1940s, or even not even genocide, let's go back to the 1930s. What if Dachau had been pinpointed on satellites so people could see what was going on within that. Would things have worked out in quite the same way if there'd have been such, the kind of technology we have today in order to bring things to bear? And let's not forget, part of what China is doing is using technology against the Uyghur people, and you've got lots of technological oppression as well as the sort of physical oppression that's going on. And as a result, we face a tough time as a global community. How do we respond, knowing now that this is going on? It's interesting that, of course, there is no necessary determination of genocide, internationally agreed, but you have seen in the US that phrase has now been established by both the outgoing Trump administration and by the incoming Biden administration, who both accept that genocide is going on in that region of China. And so we do have a basis, at least, for something that we can start to do. And that's the key thing. The world is aware. We are aware much earlier than in previous genocides what is going on. And that, I think, is a big difference between this and other examples.
Alan, people make parallels between Germany in the 1930s and China today. Do you think that's a ridiculous parallel to make, or a fair parallel? What's your comments on that?
Well, it's always very difficult looking back on history and then working out, where history ends up in the contemporary age. Of course, it's not a complete analogy. You can't go, China today is Nazi Germany in the 1930s, and what's happening in Xinjiang is like what happened in Germany in the 1930s. It's not an exact parallel because we're dealing with different countries and different things. I think that the one big thing that strikes me right now is that what you're seeing against the Uyghurs is that you have the Chinese Communist Party driving this agenda in a way that is slightly different to what happened in Germany in the 1930s. Of course, the Nazi Party was the driver of the beginnings of genocide in the 1930s. But the Nazis were elected in Germany. Large numbers of German people voted for them, knowing that they had an anti-Semitic ideology. It's very different in China, where the Chinese people, of course, have no say in their own government, and they have no say in what their government is doing. And so what we would like to observe here is it's a Chinese Communist Party that is driving this genocide. It is enforcing its policies. And as a result, that does put it into slightly different context to Germany in the 1930s. Again, I'm not suggesting that all Germans in the 1930s approved of what was happening, but you can see there's a big difference in terms of how it's being driven. And that's why I think it's appropriate the international community looks very carefully at the Chinese Communist Party and looks to take action against it, as opposed to saying China as a whole, X, Y, and Z is happening. Now, this does, of course, lead into other parts of the Chinese story, because one of the things people may not be aware of is how integrated the Chinese Communist Party essentially is into all aspects of the Chinese economy, for example. You may have heard recently that we had a big debate in this country about the company Huawei and whether we should be using its equipment in our 5G systems. Well, the decision ended up finally having gone one way initially, and then people talked it back, to reject Huawei on the grounds that we could not be certain that information that passed through that company's systems would not end up in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese state. And why is that? It's because there are laws in China that compel Chinese companies to do what the Chinese Communist Party tells it to do. And they have no power to resist that without, of course, going to jail themselves, etc. And doing that, they're breaking internal laws by doing so. Equally, many large companies in China have got Communist Party committees within the companies, and they are there to enforce ideological rigor in a way that we would find extraordinary in terms of big companies in the UK. Could you imagine having, an ideology sort of component to any company here? And yet you do have it in China. So what I'm trying to suggest is that you do have, of course, this leadership cadre, but it is embedded in lots and lots of Chinese companies as a result. And as Rahima has also said, you look at the slave labor aspect, it's quite clear that a good number of Chinese companies, just as with German companies in the 1930s and 40s, took advantage of a source of slave labor and have been using that in their products. And those are products which we may be wearing today, because a lot of the world's cotton, unfortunately, comes from this area, and a made in China product may well contain slave labor cotton, which is why, of course, we've now started to impose sanctions. The US has imposed sanctions, others have imposed sanctions, trying to stop modern day slavery from featuring within our economic systems.
And yet, And yet, China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They're currently a member of the UN Human Rights Council. And they're running the systems. I mean, the system seems broke, no?
Well, a longer conversation talk about the iniquity of the United Nations and how this functions. But yes, how can it possibly be the case that China, which is one of the world's greatest human rights offenders, violators, a country that denigrates human rights, not just here, but more generally within China, increasingly now within Hong Kong. How can this country sit on the UN Human Rights Council? How can it be that when coalitions of countries call out China's activities in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs, show evidence about what's going on, other countries will write in support of China at the United Nations to do this? Well, the answer is simple. The UN is a game. It's not a serious organization. Some of its individual entities do good work, but as a whole, of course, it's broken. It was always broken, thus, even in the times of the Soviet Union, you can see that. And essentially, we're not going to get action through the United Nations. We know that. And that's why democracies are going to have to club together and work in different ways in order to impose economic, moral, and political sort of force to force China, in a sense, to change its mind on this. Now, that's not easy. You're dealing with, a very strong-minded leadership that doesn't take kindly to interference. But the one thing we do know, Yoni, and Rahima knows this as well, is that the Chinese are very sensitive to criticism. They do not like criticism of any kind. You can see the extraordinary outbursts their diplomats have come up with when they are criticized for activities. And it tells you something. All these things, have a sort of parallel in the past. The Soviet Union, okay, at one stage the Soviet Union looked to be, a great global superpower. Of course, it was militarily, economically, not so much. But the Soviets too were concerned for their image and indeed for their acceptability within society. And something this audience will remember is the campaign for human rights for the Refusenix in the 1970s. That suddenly popped up and started embarrassing the Soviets at every opportunity. The Soviets could not turn up at any forum or any international gathering without someone saying, what about the human rights of the Refusenix, which drove them absolutely mad, because the last thing they wanted to speak about was the human rights of the Refusenix. Now, we can do similar in contemporary times with the Uyghurs and others, looking at human rights and making sure that China does not appear anywhere in any context without somebody saying, and what about what you are doing in Xinjiang? How dare you? And okay, they may choose not to engage with it, but it'll be a constant stain on their conscience and a constant stain on their record if we do that. And that is significant, but we can't do it on our own individually. No country can do it on its own. We have to do it collectively, because only collectively do we have the power to face down China's bullying economic tactics. Otherwise, you can see what happened to Australia, say last year, when the Chinese sought to punish them for having spoken out of turn several times and imposed various trading restrictions. So we do have power, but it's collective power. It starts with citizens, individuals, people on this call. It moves up to governments, and it moves collectively into groups of countries deciding they've had enough and will not tolerate genocide in the 21st century.
Wow. I'm rather speechless. And I think one thing that's really important for me for this event is we chose not to pre-record this. We want to do this live. We've got a great audience of well over 100 people who are watching this right now. And I'd like to say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure many of you at home have questions that you'd like to pose to Alan or to Rahima. And I'd like to offer you that opportunity by writing them in the chat, and we're going to try and get to some of them. But while we're doing that, I had a chat today with somebody who told me the following, something really interesting from a Holocaust survivor. And, we talk about the Holocaust as a unique event in world history, but this Holocaust survivor, and I think only really a Holocaust survivor could say this Holocaust survivor said that suffering is suffering, and it's all caused by hatred. It's indefensible. We need to be aware of it. We need to understand it, and we need to understand and see how history has taught us what hatred can do by targeting civilians. It doesn't matter where in the world, it doesn't matter when in history. We as Jewish people have an obligation to stand up and do something about it, right? We know the Torah tells us not to stand idly on the blood of our neighbor. We know how we have to do everything in our power to try and make a difference. And while we are waiting for a couple of questions to come in, it reminds me of the story of Jan Karski. Jan Karski, who you may have heard of, He was somebody who later became a righteous amongst the nations by Yad Vashem. He was the first to report many of the Nazi atrocities to the world, to the Western world. He was a Polish diplomat, and he smuggled into the Warsaw Ghetto, and he saw firsthand what was going on. And starting in 1940, he reported it to the British, to the Polish, to the US. And he eventually made his way, and he had a special note entitled "The Mass Extermination of the Jews of the German-occupied Poland." Eventually was able to address the United Nations. Sorry, not the United Nations, the president of, sorry, my mind's gone blank, sorry. Eventually went and stood in front of Anthony Eden, the British Foreign Secretary, and told him about this. He went and stood in the Oval Office in the US and addressed the then president of the United States, President Roosevelt, and he told the world what took place. And I think, Rahima, just listening to your story, I think in years to come, you will be remembered by history as somebody who stood up. You stood up for your people in the most remarkable, admirable way. We're going to go to some of the questions now. There's been one question sent to me about COVID. There's lots of conspiracy theories about coronavirus, which President Trump famously called the Chinese virus. And I wondered, perhaps, Alan, if you could, or Rahima, if you had any comments on that. Hearing everything we hear tonight, it's quite frightening, actually. And you think about those conspiracy theories, and your mind starts to wander. Alan, what do you say to that?
Well, it is a Chinese virus. Rahima, I'll let you talk about it from a local perspective.
Go ahead.
Let me just talk about it. It is a Chinese virus in the sense that nobody disagrees, nobody serious disagrees, that it started in Wuhan, in China. Okay, so from that perspective, it is certainly the Chinese virus. Now, of course, there are two theories as to how it came out. The first is the wet market argument. It came because of barbaric conditions in an animal market that then eventually morphed from animal to animal to human transmission. But of course, there is a second theory, which I think is gaining credibility by the day, that it may well have been a lab-based experimental virus that accidentally, I don't think anyone believes it was purposely released, but was accidentally released. And that is why the Chinese authorities covered it up. Let's not forget, there was a cover-up for a period of several weeks when the Chinese authorities knew full well that human-to-human transmission of a new SARS-like virus was occurring. They were being told by their own doctors this was happening. And what do? Rather than follow World Health Organization guidelines and report this and tell people what was going on and shut down and lock down. And by the way, you can see how effective their lockdowns are today. You can see exactly how effective they are and how they can lock an area down completely. Rather than doing that, they allowed this to spread. And by allowing it to spread for that period, it is they who turned this from a minor local outbreak to the global pandemic it is today, which is why a lot of us would like to see some acknowledgement of this, firstly, on the part of the Chinese authorities, and secondly, some restitution for what China has unleashed on the world, whether by incompetence or by accident. They certainly covered it up, that's for sure. Rahima, I don't know what you think about the local aspects.
Well, I would recommend people watch this latest documentary by Robin Barnwell, who I worked with, that Undercover China's Digital Gulag, which won Emmy and BAFTA and all that. So that was only released 2 weeks ago, and it's still available on ITV Hub. Pandemic, the virus that shook the world. It will give you the very good understanding about how this virus started, why China's government basically covered it up, and how it, why we are in this situation at the moment. So I'm not going to make too much comment on that, because Alan, I have, my opinion about this virus is exactly the same what Alan just said. So yeah, maybe we can move on to a different question then.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well. Somebody's pointed out that we've got the Beijing Winter Olympics in early 2022. Perhaps there should be a world boycott.
Okay, I would like to talk about this. Actually, we are launching, and we already have a no rights, no game launched by the World Uyghur Congress. that campaign. But we are launching a new campaign, a genocide campaign called a genocide game. So I would really ask you to follow Stop Uyghur Genocide, the website, and also follow me if you have Twitter account or Facebook, and you can join. We have a lot of new kind of requests that we want people to do, to follow. One thing I just want to add is that why we talk about the Uyghur genocide parallel to the Holocaust. I just want to give you a little bit more extra information. I mean, I watched films and read books even before I came to this country and about Holocaust. And we know that how this developed, it didn't happen overnight. It was first, they made the propaganda, the Nazi propaganda, that made sure that the ordinary people believed that the Jews and many other people, they didn't deserve to live. And that's exact propaganda the Chinese government been doing, very dangerous propaganda. And I'm not just making it up. I can tell you the leaked documents from Chinese classified documents that was leaked in November 2019. And in that it said, break their lineage, break their roots, break their connections. And also it said the Uyghurs, they are like a malignant tumors. The religion, the Islam, they compared it mental disease. And then it said you cannot uproot all the weeds hidden among the grass in the crops in the field one by one. You need to spray chemicals to kill them all. This is the party lines.
Drama of 1930s in 2021.
This is chilling, and we don't know mass killing happened or not, but we know there are people died. We have all these eyewitnesses who were once in the camps, and many disappeared after taken out for questioning, and they disappeared. I would also ask you to watch today's program on the 2nd of February, next Tuesday. I have been working doing translation and the subtitling work for the BBC for the last month. You will be shocked. I'm not going to say anything about that program, but this is one of the most detailed and the most horrific revelation by the camp survivors about what the CCP is doing to these people.
Rahima, sorry to interrupt you. I would like to ask you if you could, towards the end of this session, share as many links of what you've just said in the group chat, so people have the option to try to get onto some of those very important things, and I'm sure they'd be interested too. Somebody's asked us, how did your son manage to get out? That's just, I mean, a remarkable, I guess, act of fate that he was able to join you. How did that happen?
Well, when I left my country, I was a teacher. I agreed that I will come just to do the master's degree and go back, then I continue to teach. But I know I was already on the watch from every time when I went to teach my class, and often there were other teachers just sneaked in and listening to my lesson without telling me. And this happened to all the Uyghur teachers. We already knew that they are already kind of, we are under this kind of surveillance. And that's why I made a very good excuse. I wanted to improve my knowledge so I can go back and I can educate people. And that's how I left. They allowed me to leave. It took 1 year for me to obtain a passport. Normally for Chinese people, 2 weeks maximum. And then when I finished the graduation ceremony was in July 2002. And so my son and my ex, they managed to get a visa to attend the graduation ceremony here. That's how they came.
Wow.
So
wow.
That was, yeah.
Gosh.
That time it was, a situation, you cannot compare the situation now.
Now, Rahima, you're a very public face of advocacy for the Uyghur people. does that put you in any personal risk, in personal danger to you or your family? I mean, it sounds quite frightening if the Chinese state would see you doing what you're doing. Does that affect you in any way?
Of course. When you do right things, especially this is kind of things that when you speak about the truth, when you look back, all these advocates, the people who wanted better future for their own people, they didn't, the ending was not always the best, but people remember them, like Martin Luther King, like a Gandhi, like all these people. They know the risks and that they had to do the right thing. And I was brought up in a very religious family. I was taught to be truthful, to be honest, to defend yourself and the other people. This was like teachings that I was taught from young age. And I was at Tiananmen Square in 1989, knowing that what could happen if we lost that protest. And I guess I just have that gene, or have that kind of what you call courage in me. And the reason I came here, the leaving my job and my family, it wasn't like I want to just seek a better life in another country, but I wanted to promote and raise awareness about my people and the human rights situation. And since 2016, when this kind of situation, when we are in life and death situation, then regardless what is going to happen to me or to my family, someone has to speak up. And all the Uyghurs who are speaking up, well, not many. In every country, they just countable Uyghurs. We are telling the story. But who else can do that for us if we all scared? And if I stopped everything because of fear, then Chinese government, the CCP won, because that's what they want. And at least in this country, I feel safe. At least I know I am compared to in many different countries like Turkey or in Central Asia. I still feel safe. But I don't know what is going to happen tomorrow or day after. But for me, it's like I just have to do the right thing. And I know those people suffering, they cannot tell, they cannot speak for themselves. And those who survived camps, many wouldn't talk. They may not talk all the rest of their life because they want to forget about the horror. And what we have, luckily, we have handful of, less than 10 handful camp survivors. They're so brave that I really, really cannot imagine, when they left the camp, they signed a document and promised that they won't tell anything, what they saw, what happened to them. And they agreed that if they did, that their family members, their people will be at risk. But they came forward. They said, now if I don't say it, what is going to happen to our people? So I think initially, if the mass killing didn't happen, maybe they already had this intention, but because of satellite images, because of all these reports, because of leaked documents, because of people like me, maybe that has stopped the mass killing. That could be the reason. So we don't know. So therefore, I think I can only do what I can, what is possible for me. Like today, talking to everyone. And I really feel privileged to be able to speak so freely without worry, without, thinking someone is going to knock the door next minute and arrest me.
Rahima, everyone on here, we're now living in a very different world, and we spend much of our time on Zoom at many events like this, but there's actually nothing like this, because when this Zoom finishes, everyone who's been witness to your testimony and your story is going to leave here with a sense of what next? What can we practically do? And I think this is a question, Alan, as well, on a personal level, on a government level, in terms of specific actions, aside from writing to our MPs, in terms of the Chinese embassy here in London. If I recall, somebody's written, if I recall, their spokeswoman on Radio 4 denies everything. There was mentioned this evening, we spoke about boycotting Chinese products. Is there a certain list of things that you would recommend we boycott? I'd appreciate, Alan, first, your reflections, and Rahima, your reflections as well on this, please.
Yeah, there are all sorts of things that individuals and governments can do. I mean, you start off, everyone here can indeed choose not to buy Chinese products that are involved in slave labor or things you suspect may well be, or even go further and just boycott as many Chinese products as possible, because although it may seem a very minor issue, the more people that do it, the more it has some impact on the bottom line. One of you won't make a difference, but if 100, then 1,000, then 100,000, etc., do, then suddenly it does start to make a difference in that regard. Sign petitions, write to your MP, support organizations like Rahima's with money, with information, social media sharing, share information. I know there's been a request in the chat to see the documentary. The more we share this sort of information, Rahima's quite right, the more she's on TV, the more people share this sort of information, the more likely it is that this genocide doesn't get beyond this stage, because it's just too painful for the Chinese if it does, and there's too many questions being asked of them, and there are too many repercussions because of it. But yes, then once it gets to the government level, of course we have to do more to force our legislators to do this. There's a lot of tendency, isn't there, to put our commercial interests first and to go, well, there's a human rights issue, let's park it because we want Chinese money, X, Y, and Z. Well, unfortunately, it's money that is tainted with blood. Essentially, it is the blood of Rahima's family and others who we are welcoming in this way. And it's just unacceptable today as well. Sanctions, of course, we should be imposing on individuals involved in the genocide, others who are supporting it, companies that are involved in that. There are plenty of ways to do this and to make sure that there are repercussions for the regime for following this path. We may not be able to stop it overnight, but the more we can make a noise about it, the more it is unpleasant. I cited that Soviet example before, the more likely it is that something will eventually give on the human rights front. And it's worth bearing in mind that actually, that although the Soviet Union collapsed, of course, in 1991, what you did have was a relaxation of the human rights situation much earlier, because so much noise had been made internationally. The Refusenix campaign, the Helsinki Watch, all of these sort of issues did have an impact. So we've got direct parallels in recent history to show that, you know, our sort of people power can make a difference. And particularly with social media, there's plenty of scope for us to do so. So I think there's a lot we can do actually today in a way that we couldn't do, say, 80 years ago.
Rahima, is there anything you wish to add to that in terms of what we should be doing?
Yes, thank you so much, Alan. And I agree 100%. There's so much everyone can do if you're willing to do it. That is also adding to what Alan said, that 2022 Olympic, we will have a campaign. We will launch a campaign very soon. I will send the link to Rabbi Yoni, and maybe you can share with, and also you can find me on Twitter, on Facebook. Most of the posts that I share is things that is related to about what is happening to my people, what other people can do. And also Stop Uyghur Genocide is completely run by volunteers, and we want to make this a more effective campaign, in that then we also need money as well. And of course, if you have money, if you feel that you don't have time or anything else, that at least you can donate, then you can donate the GoFundMe Stop Uyghur Genocide, that maybe we can employ someone who can do more work. So there are plenty things that people can do, and especially the boycotting is, I believe it is maybe the most effective way that we can the reason China is behaving this way is because of its economic power, and how we can also influence our governments to also the trade relationship, how they can sanction companies and etc. So I believe in people's power, and the pressure has to come from us, from people. Thank you.
Rahima, just one final question. Somebody's asked about the support that you've found from the Muslim community. Obviously, your brothers may feel that this is something directly relevant to them. Could you tell us a little bit about that individually, collectively? What support have they offered?
Well, we do have a lot of individual Muslim people. Some organizations are doing a lot, but not from the government, sadly. But Muslim people are quite vocal, but not as much as outrage as cartoon things. Something like cartoon. But that's I mean, like my friend Majid Nawaz has been speaking. Very vocal on his LBC show and Twitter. And this is not just a Muslim issue. And that's why, we have support from Jewish community and from many other communities as well. But sadly, because of the Chinese power, the economic power and diplomatic power, like over countries like Kazakhstan, Pakistan, and Arab countries. Therefore, sadly, these countries are being very, very silent. It should be, we expected them to be vocal, but sadly they were very silent. But I cannot say the people, but there are people also in those countries, people, they don't have human rights. I mean, they're not living in a kind of very open society. So we do have support, but I think it should be much stronger, much bigger. And that's why I think I have a lot more work to do. Yeah.
Before we conclude the session, I'd like to just say a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to extend a very big thank you to my friend Philip Vecht, whose idea it was to put this event on. It really was fantastic. Philip is one of the trustees of JRoots, and I'd like to thank him and also our partners for joining today at the S&P community and at JRoots. I'd like to say this is just the beginning. We've uncovered something here that maybe some of you knew already, maybe for some of you, this is the first time you've really had an opportunity to directly engage and hear firsthand. And I think it comes with that a certain sense of responsibility. That may be something as simple as telling your friends and family about it. It may be something as simple as going on Facebook and sharing this so your own friends can see this event. It may be following Rahima on Twitter. It may be doing something like organizing an event for your own local community to find out more about this, because this is everyone's issue. And I think that's really, really important to say. I'd like to just offer opportunity for Zach and Alan and Rahima to just say some closing remarks. And on behalf of everyone here, I'm so humbled Rahima has joined us, and I'm so grateful to everybody, particularly Dr. Alan Mendoza and Zach Jaffe for their contribution. So if we can start perhaps first with Zach, and then we'll go to Alan, and then finally Rahima.
Okay, thank you, Yoni. I think if there's a word that characterizes the conversation, the discussion that's been had, it's overwhelming. I think for many people coming in here, hearing firsthand the accounts were overwhelmed, and I would say the background to the question of what we can do is we often feel overwhelmed by it. When Alan talked about boycotting Chinese goods, people feel that this is a burden which is so impossible to bear. How can we make a difference here? But I think together with Yoni, I think we've been in Poland together a number of times on various journeys exploring the Holocaust. You know what? Studying the Holocaust is an overwhelming experience, and if I'm reflecting on especially students and young people who are engaging in Holocaust education, they are overwhelmed, but what they are looking for is not necessarily the question, as we would say in Hebrew, of lama, which is why, it's lama. And for what? And what am I doing next? And I think that some of the things that come out here, sort of motivate young people to say, well, there actually is something to do. There are achievable goals that we can set ourselves here. And really sort of my sense, sort of bouncing off what Rabbi Yoni said, is we say it's not for us to finish the job. Yet it doesn't allow us to desist from starting it. That even though it seems something which is overwhelming, I think hopefully that tonight, both of your insights have set us on that path to learn from our past in order to start to change the future. So really from the JRoots team in particular, I know there were even some of the survivors who joined us at our ceremony last week who are here on the call, hearing your story. So I think bringing those two stories together is an important part of starting that process. So a big thank you.
Can I just interject and say, if there are any Holocaust survivors who are on this call who wish to unmute and say something, you have the right to do so, and I give you that full permission to unmute yourself and speak over any of us, because I think we would all be very honored to hear from you as well, firsthand. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Alan, who we're also enthralled to hear from.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to take 30 seconds. I'm just going to say, having listened to Rahima tonight, how can anyone think it can be business as usual with China tomorrow? Seriously, you've heard the testimony firsthand. She'll send you links that you can verify yourself. You'll see the evidence in front of your eyes. Having seen the evidence, you've got a simple choice. Do you go, well, it's not very nice, but I'm just going to get on with things as normal? Or are you going to say, I'm going to do even one little thing to tell people about this and to make sure that my voice is added to those that say that is unacceptable and we can make a change? You don't have to move a world yourself, but collectively you can do with a number of small actions together. So think about your next purchase. Think about what you've got in your hand. Do you have a Huawei phone? Replace it. Do you have something else that you could buy somewhere else? It's very simple. Is there somebody you could direct to Rahima's work or send to your friends? Things like that. That's what starts massive movements and which eventually lead to global change. So I just leave you that thought. You've all got the power to do something. I hope you will do it.
Rahima, over to you, and then I've just got a couple of closing comments.
I can't thank enough, especially this community, your community, Jewish people, and especially for the last 2 years, led by René Kissan, and also the Henry Jackson Society was one of the very first organization that organized the event in the parliament. I spoke at that event with Ben Roger. So I'm grateful that you believe that things can change if you get involved. And I could feel this parallel so strongly. I was in Dachau last year with the Japanese scholars. I went with them to interview some Uyghurs in Munich, and I went there. I was crying throughout from the beginning, from entering the place until I left, because the similarity of the translation work, although I didn't see the camps inside, but in my country, but the similarity, how the ordeals that the people that suffered. Therefore, I think it is important to have that compassion. Whatever happened in the past, we cannot change. But what is happening now, that I believe people, we can change if we just believe in our power and try do something about it. And I believe in hope. I think the Holocaust, this year, the Holocaust message to be light in the darkness. And I spoke in many different events. It has been a very emotional week. It's sad at the same time, it's very uplifting. So I don't want to leave you in a kind of very sad mood. Even in my concerts, I always end my concert with a dancing piece, because I don't like people left in tears. But I want you to turn any kind of sadness into power, into strength, and try to help me and help my people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've noticed that there's a lady who's unmuted herself. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I would like to. Rahima, I am from Montreal, and you shocked me to this core. And I just have one suggestion. I am into the Holocaust education in Montreal, and I work as a volunteer as a Montreal Holocaust Museum, and also the March of the Livings, the kids. We always start education with the kids. They are the future. They are the future ministers. And if, I don't know, just a suggestion, maybe Zach should organize the International March of the Livings and invite you, if you would be so kind enough, and tell all this for the kids. You know, like they are the one who go to Walmart and they buy, you know, the running shoes. They are the one who buy the sweatshirt. Maybe if you tell all this, we could change their mind.
Thank you.
Love you.
Thank you.
Love you. You
No,
thank you so much.
I can see some very wet eyes in the video chats. You know, to see a Holocaust survivor who's lived through this, and Rahima, who is living through this, whose own family are currently being subjected to this. For me, it's chilling, it's frightening. We cannot allow history to repeat itself. Somebody has private messaged me to say there are a lot of other atrocities going on in other parts of the world, and that's absolutely correct. But I just want to say, you know, tonight's the beginning, not the end. I'd like to also mention that this session will be available on theus.tv. If any of you follow me on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, I will be posting this session on there tomorrow, together with a list of links that Rahima will share with me for all the things that we've spoken about this evening. But I'd like to just conclude by thanking everyone coming. It's a very important session. And really, you know, see on the screen, side by side, as I said, a Holocaust survivor and somebody who's living through this, that speaks for itself. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I wish you all good night. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you, Rahima.
Thank you.